The silence in the kitchen wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that feels like a physical weight on your chest, making every breath you take sound too loud. I sat there, my fingers tracing the chipped edge of my favorite ceramic mug, watching my daughter, Elena, through the steam of my coffee. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at a brochure. A glossy, colorful piece of paper that featured smiling seniors playing bridge and manicured lawns that looked too green to be real. Highland Palms Luxury Living, the header screamed in a friendly, gold font. "It's not an old folks' home, Mom," Elena said, her voice smooth, rehearsed, like she was selling me a vacuum cleaner instead of a life sentence. "It's a transition." You're 68. This house. It's a lot for you. The stairs, the garden. Don't you want to just relax? I looked at her. Really looked at her. This was the girl I'd stayed up with through every fever. The woman whose college tuition I'd paid for by working double shifts at the clinic until my joints screamed. And now, she was looking at me like I was a piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. "I like the stairs, Elena," I said softly. "They keep my legs strong. And the garden. Those roses are the only things in this neighborhood that still know how to grow without permission." She let out a sharp, impatient huff. "We already talked about this. Mark and I need the space. With the new baby coming and his promotion. We thought we'd move in here, modernize the place, and you'd be much more comfortable in a suite where people can check on you. Check on me. Like a patient. Like a problem." I didn't tell her then. I didn't tell her that the house she was already mentally painting minimalist gray didn't actually belong to me anymore. I didn't tell her about the papers I'd signed 3 months ago when I realized her care was starting to feel a lot like containment. "I'll think about it," I lied. She stood up, leaning over to peck my cheek. Felt cold. "Good. Because I already scheduled a tour for Friday. Don't be difficult, Mom. It's for your own good." As the front door clicked shut, I didn't cry. I just sat there. I looked around at the crown molding my late husband, Elias, had installed with his own calloused hands. I looked at the height marks penciled onto the pantry door. Marks Elena thought gave the house character for its future resale. She thought she was playing chess. She thought she was the one moving the pieces. But Elena had forgotten one very important thing. I was the one who taught her how to play. And I had a move she never saw coming. If you think betrayal starts with a shout, you're wrong. Starts with a brochure and a smile. The next few days were a masterclass in atmospheric pressure. Elena and Mark were over every evening. They weren't visiting, they were auditing. Mark, a man who couldn't tell a load-bearing wall from a curtain rod, was walking around with a tape measure. "We can knock this wall down," I heard him whisper to Elena in the hallway. "Open concept. It'll add at least 50 grand to the value if we ever decide to flip it." "Shoo," Elena hissed. "She's right there." I was right there, sitting in my recliner, pretending to read a novel I'd already finished years ago. I was a ghost in my own hallway. To them I was already gone. I was just the logistical hurdle between them and a 4-bedroom colonial in a zip code they couldn't afford on their own. "Mom!" Elena called out, her voice pitching up into that fake cheerfulness again. "Mark thinks the basement has a bit of a dampness issue. We should probably clear out your old sewing stuff this weekend. Just to lighten the load for the move. My sewing stuff. My mother's Singer machine. The quilts I'd made for Elena's crib. To her, it was load. To me, it was the fabric of my life. I'm not moving this weekend, Elena," I said, not looking up from my book. "Of course not," Mark chimed in, stepping into the living room, wiping dust from his hands onto his expensive slacks. "But the market is hot, Margaret. If we get the listing ready now, we can have you settled in Highland Palms by the end of the month. It's all about timing." Timing. He was right about that. That night after they left, I went to the small safe in my bedroom. My hands were steady. I pulled out a manila envelope. Inside wasn't a deed. It wasn't a will. It was a contract. When Elias died, he left me the house, but he also left me a massive debt I hadn't known about. A business loan gone wrong. To keep the roof over Elena's head while she was in law school, I had made a deal. I had sold the equity to a private investment group with a life estate clause. It meant I could live here until the day I died, but the moment I voluntarily vacated or sold my interest, the house belonged to them. But I had recently discovered something else. Loophole. A way to sell the remaining reversionary interest entirely, to a developer who wanted to turn this corner lot into a boutique medical plaza. Elena thought I owned the house outright and was going to gift it to her so she could put me in a home. She was planning to use my equity to fund her lifestyle. Picked up the phone. I called Mr. Henderson, the developer. Is the offer still on the table? Yes. For that location? Absolutely, Mrs. Vance. But your daughter? Is she on board? I thought you wanted to leave it to her. I looked at the picture of Elena on my nightstand. The one where she was smiling at her graduation. My daughter has her own plans, I said, my voice cracking just a little before turning to Steele. It's time I had mine. Send the papers over tomorrow. I want it done before Friday. I was about to burn the bridge they were trying to push me off of. Friday arrived with a cruel bright sun. Elena showed up at 9 a.m. sharp, dressed in a power suit. She looked like she was heading to a closing, not a tour of an assisted living facility. Ready, Mom? She asked, jingling her car keys. Ready, I said. I had a small suitcase packed. She thought it was for the transition. It was actually for the hotel I'd booked across town. The tour of Highland Palms was exactly what I expected. The smell of industrial lavender and hidden bleach. The activity director named Tiffany who spoke to me in the same tone people use for golden retrievers. And here we have the sunroom. Tiffany chirped. We do yoga here at 10, and we have a wonderful knitting circle. Elena was nodding vigorously, her eyes darting around the room, probably calculating how much she'd save on my monthly expenses if she took the basic package. It's perfect, isn't it, Mom? You'll make so many friends. I looked at a woman sitting in the corner of the sunroom. She was staring out the window at a parking lot, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like she was waiting for a bus that was never coming. It's very clean, I said. See? Elena said, squeezing my arm. I knew you'd like it. I've already talked to the admissions office. We can sign the intent forms today. And since the house is... Well, since we're moving in there, we can handle all the paperwork for the transfer of the deed tomorrow. There it was. The transfer of the deed. The moment she thought she'd officially become the queen of my castle. Let's go back to the house first, I said. I have something for you. A gift? Mark asked, joining us from the lobby where he'd been on a work call. He couldn't hide the greed in his eyes. You could call it that, I said. A reality check. The drive back was quiet. Elena talked about paint swatches. Mark talked about the curb appeal of the front yard once they ripped out my rose bushes. I just watched the trees go by, feeling a strange sense of mourning, not for the house, but for the daughter I thought I had. When we pulled into the driveway, there was a black sedan parked at the curb. Mr. Henderson was leaning against it, holding a briefcase. Who's that? Elena asked, her brow furrowing. Is that a realtor? Mom, did you call a realtor without telling me? No, I said, stepping out of the car. My knees didn't hurt. For the first time in years I felt light. He's not a realtor, Elena. He's the new owner. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. The what? The look on her face was worth every penny I was about to lose. Elena didn't move. She didn't even blink. She just stood there in her designer heels, looking at Mr. Henderson as if he were a hallucination brought on by the midday sun. Mark, on the other hand, was already puffing out his chest, stepping toward the man with a clipboard. I think there's been a mistake, Mark said, his voice tight with that fake authority he used when a waiter forgot his drink order. This property is family-owned. My wife is the heir. Who are you? Mr. Henderson didn't flinch. He'd spent 30 years dealing with people like Mark. He simply held out a business card. I'm the developer who just finalized the purchase of the reversionary interest and the life estate buyout. Mrs. Vance and I settled the final signatures an hour ago via digital notary. The wire transfer has already cleared. Elena finally found her voice. It wasn't the smooth, corporate voice from the kitchen. It was high, shrill, the voice of the little girl who used to throw tantrums when she didn't get the biggest slice of cake. You sold it. Mom, you can't sell it. This is my inheritance. This is where we were going to live. We had the contractors coming on Monday. I felt a strange, cold peace wash over me. I walked past her, up the front porch steps, and turned around to look down at them. You were going to live here, Elena. You told me I was going to Highland Palms for my own good. You said this house was a burden for me. I just relieved myself of that burden. I thought you'd be happy. Happy, she screamed. You sold it to a developer. They're going to tear it down. They're going to turn our history into a parking lot. It stopped being our history the moment you started measuring the walls for your own benefit while I was still breathing in the rooms, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her shouting like a blade. You didn't want the history, Elena. You wanted the equity. Well, the equity is gone. It's in a trust now. A trust that you don't control. Mark looked like he was going to explode. How much? How much did you get for it? Smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Enough to make sure I never have to see the inside of Highland Palms. And enough to ensure that if you want a 4-bedroom colonial, you're going to have to earn it yourself. They stood in the driveway of a house that was no longer theirs to claim, and for the first time in 40 years, I felt like the walls weren't closing in, they were opening up. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of boxes and bitterness. Per the agreement, I had 3 days to vacate. Mr. Henderson was generous. He even provided a professional moving crew. Elena stayed. Not to help but to scavenge. She followed me from room to room, pointing at furniture, at paintings, at the silver. I want the mahogany sideboard, she'd say, her arms crossed. And the Persian rug from the den. You won't have room for those in whatever little apartment you're hiding in. The sideboard is going to the local community center, I told the movers, ignoring her. The rug is being donated to the library. You're giving it away. Elena's voice was a jagged edge. You're literally giving away my childhood just to spite me. Stop. I was holding a small wooden box, the one where Elias kept his watch and his wedding ring. I looked her dead in the eye. Spite. Elena, look around. For 3 years since your father died, you haven't visited this house unless you needed something. You didn't come for Sunday dinner. You came to ask for early inheritance for Mark's tech startup. You didn't come to check on my health. You came to check if the roof was still in good enough shape for a high appraisal. That's not true, she cried, but she couldn't meet my gaze. It is true. You treated me like a tenant in my own life. You were so busy planning for the day I was gone that you forgot I was still here. You didn't want a relationship with your mother. You wanted a real estate transaction. Well, the transaction is closed. She stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the glass rattled. Mark was waiting for her in the car, probably already calling his lawyer. They thought they could sue. They thought they could prove I wasn't of sound mind. But they forgot one thing. I'd spent 30 years as a head nurse. I kept records of everything. Every forgetful moment they tried to manufacture, every time they'd pressured me to sign papers, I had it all documented. I wasn't just a mother. I was a witness. I realized then that the hardest part of letting go of the house wasn't the bricks and mortar. It was letting go of the hope that my daughter would eventually see me as a person again. By Sunday morning, the house was an echo chamber. The movers had taken the last of the furniture. My suitcases were by the door. I sat on the bottom step of the staircase, the one where Elena used to sit and wait for the school bus. A knock came at the door. It was Mark. He wasn't yelling this time. He looked desperate. "Margaret," he said, stepping into the foyer. "Look, Elena is. She's a mess. We had a lot riding on this house. We've already put a down payment on a new car and the nursery. We took out a bridge loan. We thought the house would cover it. I looked at him. Truly looked at the man my daughter had chosen. He was a gambler who played with other people's chips. That was a very risky move, Mark. Especially considering you didn't own the asset. We're family, he pleaded. Just give us a portion of the sale. Just enough to clear the debt. If you do that, we can talk about you coming to live with us. We'll build an ADU in the backyard. You won't have to go to a home. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. Now that the money was gone, they were offering me the very thing they'd spent months trying to avoid. A place in their lives. But it wasn't out of love. It was a ransom. I've already spent the first portion of the money, I said calmly. Mark's eyes widened. On what? It's been 48 hours. I bought a small cottage by the coast. I lied, well, half lied. I'd actually set up a scholarship fund in Elias's name for nursing students. But Mark didn't need to know that. And the rest is locked in an irrevocable trust that pays out a modest monthly stipend for my living expenses. Cannot be touched by anyone else. Not for debt, not for bridge loans, not for nurseries. Mark's face turned a deep, bruised purple. The nice guy mask shattered. You crazy old bat. You've ruined us. You've ruined your own daughter's future. No, Mark, I said, standing up and grabbing my keys. I've secured my own. And for the first time in a long time, Elena is going to have to learn what a future actually costs. The door didn't just close behind me as I left. Lock. The drive to the coast was the longest 5 hours of my life. I wasn't just driving away from a house. I was driving away from a version of myself that existed only to serve others. The rearview mirror showed the suburbs fading into gray, replaced by the jagged, honest lines of the cliffs. I pulled up to a small, weathered cottage. It wasn't the luxury of Highland palms. It was small, salt-sprayed, and smelled like cedar and old books. I sat on the porch for 3 hours, just watching the tide. My phone buzzed. 37 missed calls. 11 texts. All from Elena. How could you? Mark is losing his mind. We're going to contest the sale. I didn't reply. Couldn't. Every word from her felt like a brick being thrown at a window I'd worked so hard to clean. I realized that for 20 years, I had been an emotional atom. Whenever she was short on rent, whenever Mark's sure thing fell through, I was the one who filled the gap. And the moment I stopped being a resource, I became a nuisance. That night, the wind howled around the eaves. It was lonely, yes, but it was a clean kind of lonely. There were no whispers in the hallway about my declining health. There were no tape measures clicking against my baseboards. Just the ocean, reminding me that things have been crashing and rebuilding long before I got here. I realized then that the safety of family is sometimes just a cage with very expensive wallpaper. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived. Thick, cream-colored paper. Sullivan and Associates. Elena's law firm. She was suing to annul the sale. The grounds. Diminished mental capacity. She was claiming that I didn't understand the contract I signed with Mr. Henderson. She was claiming I was a victim of elder abuse by a predatory developer. I sat at my small kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling beside me, and I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had seen the bottom of the well and found it dry. I called my own lawyer, Sarah, a woman I'd known since she was a candy striper at the hospital where I worked. They're going through with it, Sarah, I said. I expected as much, Margaret, she replied. But they don't know about the checkmate folder, do they? No, I said. They don't. The checkmate folder was a digital file I'd been compiling for 18 months. It contained recordings of Elena and Mark talking about liquidating the asset, while I was in the next room. It contained emails from Mark asking me to sign over my power of attorney, just in case. And most importantly, it contained a clean bill of mental health from 3 independent neurologists, dated the day before I signed the sale papers. We go to mediation next Tuesday, Sarah said. Be ready. It's going to get ugly. Betrayal is a messy business, but justice. Justice is a ledger that eventually has to balance. The conference room was cold. Too much glass, too much chrome. Elena sat across from me looking pale. Mark sat next to her, tapping a pen rhythmically against the table. Blick, blick, blick. Mrs. Vance, their lawyer began, his voice dripping with condescending sympathy. We don't want this to be difficult. Elena loves you. She's worried. This sale was impulsive. If you just admit you weren't feeling yourself, we can reverse the transaction and get you the care you need. I looked at Elena. Is that what you want, honey? To tell these strangers I've lost my mind? Elena's lip trembled, but her eyes stayed hard. You left us with nothing, Mom. You sold our future. I'm doing this to protect what's left of this family. Protecting the family, or protecting the down payment on that car Mark bought? Yes. Mark slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. You're clearly delusional. We have witnesses who say you've been acting erratic for months. Sarah, my lawyer, calmly opened her laptop. Actually, let's talk about witnesses. She played a recording. It was from 6 months ago. A hidden camera I'd set up in my kitchen after I noticed money missing from my jar. It showed Mark and Elena sitting at my table. If we can just get her to sign the deed over now, Mark's voice came through the speakers clear as a bell, we can flip the house by spring. She'll be fine in a facility. She won't even know the difference after a few months of those meds. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena looked at the floor. Mark looked at the door. And I finally looked at the truth. The lawsuit was dropped within the hour. There was no diminished capacity. There was only a daughter who had been caught trying to harvest her mother's life while she was still living it. I don't want to see you for a while, Elena, I said as we stood in the hallway of the law office. Mom, please, she whispered. We're broke. The bridge loan. They're going to take our condo. Then you'll move into an apartment, I said. You'll work. You'll figure it out, just like I did when your father died and left me with nothing but a house and a mountain of debt I never told you about. She looked shocked. What debt? It doesn't matter now. Paid it off. I kept the roof over your head. I did my job. But my job as your safety net is over. You're a grown woman. It's time you learned how to walk without leaning on me. I walked away. I didn't look back to see if she was crying. I didn't look back to see Mark's anger. I just walked out into the sunlight. I took the money from the sale, the portion that wasn't in the trust, and I did something I'd never done in 68 years. I bought a plane ticket. Not to visit a relative. Not for a funeral. Just for me. Sometimes you have to lose a house to find your home. 6 months later, I was sitting in a small cafe in Florence, Italy. The air smelled of espresso and history. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Elena. I hesitated before opening it. I expected more vitriol. Instead, it was a photo. A photo of a small, cramped apartment, messy with baby toys. And a photo of Elena, looking tired but real. We lost the condo, the email read. Mark left. He couldn't handle the lack of lifestyle. I'm working as a public defender now. It's hard. The baby is walking. Sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I didn't see you. I only saw what I could get from you. I didn't reply right away. I took a sip of my wine and looked at the sunset over the Arno River. I felt a flicker of the old motherly instinct to rush back and help. To fix it. To pay the bills. But I stayed in my seat. Forgiveness doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it means letting them grow in the space you left behind. I returned to my cottage by the sea a year after the sale. The medical plaza had been built where my old house stood. I drove past it once. It was a clean, modern building where people were getting healed. I didn't feel sad. My roses were gone, but the ground was still being used for something good. I'd spent my life building a house out of people. I thought that if I loved them enough, if I provided enough, the walls would hold me up. But I learned that people are shifting sand. The only foundation that actually holds is the one you build inside yourself. I started a garden at the cottage. Small at first. Just some herbs and a few hardy shrubs that could handle the salt air. I realized that I wasn't an old lady waiting to be stored away. I was a woman in her prime, finally free of the expectations of a daughter who didn't know how to be a person. Justice isn't always a gavel hitting a bench. Sometimes, justice is just a quiet afternoon where no one wants anything from you. Elena and I talk now. Once a month. Short calls. She's working 2 jobs raising her son. He sounds older. He sounds better. She's learning that a house isn't a right. It's a responsibility. And she's learning that her mother isn't an inheritance. She's a human being. I'm 70 now. My joints still ache sometimes, and the stairs at the cottage are steep. But I climb them every night, and every night I am grateful for the strength in my legs. If I had stayed in that house, I would have died in that house, slowly, piece by piece, as they chipped away at my spirit. By selling out, I actually bought back my life. The lesson: don't wait for people to give you the respect you deserve. Sometimes you have to pack your bags, sell the house they think is theirs, and walk into the sunset they told you you were too old to see. Your life belongs to you. Not to your children, not to your past, and certainly not to a brochure for a luxury living facility. The walls may fall, but the soul can always build something new. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.